The October rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ashford estate in Highland Park, Dallas, where mansions worth millions lined the pristine, tree-lined streets. Jessica Monroe stood in the master bedroom, her reflection fragmented in the antique mirror, a fitting metaphor for the woman she'd become over 3 years of marriage to Robert Ashford III. The bruise on her ribcage, hidden beneath her silk robe, throbbed with each breath. At 28, Jessica had believed she'd found her fairy tale when Robert pursued her relentlessly after they met at a charity gala. He was charming, successful, heir to a commercial real estate empire worth over $300 million. His mother, Eleanor Ashford, had initially seemed welcoming, though Jessica soon learned that Eleanor's smiles were as carefully constructed as the family's public image. The first time Robert hit her was 6 months into their marriage. She'd questioned a charge on their joint credit card, $20,000 at a jewelry store she'd never visited. His hand connected with her cheek before she could finish the sentence. The shock had been worse than the pain, but then came the apologies, the tears, the promises. The honeymoon stage returned, and Jessica convinced herself it was an isolated incident. It wasn't. The violence escalated methodically. Robert's control extended beyond physical abuse. He monitored her car's odometer, tracked her phone's GPS, and gradually restricted her access to their bank accounts, despite her own successful career as an interior designer. She'd inherited a modest trust fund from her grandmother, $200,000 that had been her safety net. Last month, she discovered Robert had forged her signature and drained it entirely. Eleanor proved to be not a mother-in-law, but an accomplice. The 72-year-old matriarch had struck Jessica twice, once for disrespecting Robert at a family dinner, and again for suggesting they spend Christmas with Jessica's family instead of at the Ashford compound. In Highland Park's culture of affluence, where maintaining the appearance of perfection was paramount, Eleanor made it clear family problems stayed behind closed doors. Jessica had tried to leave once. She'd packed a bag and driven to a women's shelter, only to be turned away. With her husband's income on paper, she didn't qualify for their services. Meanwhile, Robert had maxed out her credit cards and ensured she couldn't access funds for a private attorney. The irony was suffocating. She was technically wealthy, but practically imprisoned. This morning, everything changed. Jessica's phone buzzed with a notification from her bank. A new account had been opened in her name, but she hadn't opened it. Heart-pounding, she'd called the bank's fraud department. The representative's words detonated like grenades. Robert had used her identity to open multiple accounts, funneling money into offshore holdings. There were forged documents, fraudulent loans taken against properties she supposedly owned. The wedding anniversary party was tonight. Eleanor had planned an elaborate affair at the estate. 200 guests, a live orchestra, Dallas's elite social circle. The Ashfords would showcase their perfect marriage to the community that valued status above all else. Jessica had been ordered to smile, to play her role, to maintain the facade. But Jessica had made 3 phone calls this afternoon. The first was to a divorce attorney who agreed to a consultation based on the fraud evidence. The second was to her college roommate, Maria, who worked as an investigative journalist. The third was to her uncle, a retired FBI agent who'd always suspected something was wrong. As thunder rolled across the Dallas skyline, Jessica made a decision. She would attend the party. She would smile for the cameras. And then, surrounded by witnesses, she would reveal the truth that Robert and Eleanor had fought so viciously to conceal. The timing was everything. In a community where reputation meant power, public exposure would be Robert's ultimate reckoning. She touched the bruise on her ribs one last time. After tonight, she would never be silent again. The Ashford estate blazed with light as guests arrived in their luxury vehicles, Bentleys, Mercedes, Teslas, lining the circular driveway. Jessica descended the marble staircase in an emerald gown that Eleanor had selected, her makeup carefully applied to conceal the faint yellowing of a 2-week-old bruise near her temple. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, white roses flown in from Ecuador, and champagne towers that cost more than most families' annual income. Robert stood at the room's center, commanding attention in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. At 42, he was handsome in the way wealthy men often are, not naturally, but curated through personal trainers, dermatologists, and the confidence that unlimited money provides. He pulled Jessica close when she reached him, his fingers digging into her waist hard enough to bruise. To observers, it looked affectionate. Jessica knew better. "Remember what we discussed," Robert murmured against her ear, his voice silk wrapped around steel. "You smile, you're grateful. You're the luckiest woman in Dallas, understood?" Jessica nodded, her heart a war drum in her chest. Across the room, Eleanor held court with the wives of oil executives and tech entrepreneurs. The matriarch wore diamonds that had belonged to Texas railroad barons, her silver hair styled in a severe chignon that matched her personality. She caught Jessica's eye and smiled, a warning disguised as warmth. The evening proceeded with mechanical precision. Jessica made small talk with guests she'd never liked, accepted congratulations on 3 years of marital bliss, and played the role she'd been assigned. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind catalogued every face in the room. The mayor's wife, the district attorney, the president of Highland Park's most exclusive country club, the publisher of Dallas's Society magazine, witnesses, all of them. At 8 o'clock, the orchestra paused. Robert clinked his champagne glass, preparing to give a speech. This was the moment Eleanor had orchestrated. Robert's public tribute to their perfect marriage, complete with a surprise gift, a new Range Rover with a bow on it, parked outside. Jessica was supposed to cry with joy. She was supposed to kiss him. She was supposed to perpetuate the lie. But as Robert began speaking about devotion and partnership, Jessica's phone vibrated in her clutch. A text from Maria. "Got everything. Documents confirmed. Ready when you are." Robert's speech continued, his voice smooth as aged bourbon. "My wife has been my greatest blessing. She stood by me, supported me, and made our house a home. I can't imagine my life without her." The words were ash in Jessica's mouth. She thought of every time his fists had left her gasping on the bathroom floor, every time Eleanor had called her worthless, stupid, a gold digger who should be grateful for the Ashford name, every penny stolen, every signature forged, every moment of freedom stripped away. Robert extended his hand toward her. "Jessica, darling, come here." She walked forward, each step deliberate. The room watched with champagne-fueled attention. Robert pulled her close, and in that moment, with 200 pairs of eyes on them, Jessica stepped back from his embrace. "I need to say something," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. Robert's expression flickered, confusion, then anger carefully masked. "Sweetheart, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." Jessica turned to face the crowd, her hands steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. "Because all of you need to see what you've been celebrating." Eleanor moved forward, her face rigid. "Jessica, don't be dramatic. You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Eleanor. I've been embarrassed long enough. I've been beaten long enough." The words detonated in the silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jessica continued, her voice stronger now. "My husband has physically abused me for nearly 3 years. His mother has participated. And together they've stolen over $200,000 from me through forgery and fraud." Robert lunged toward her, his mask finally slipping, but Jessica's uncle materialized at her side, 6 feet of retired FBI agent creating a barrier. Maria pushed through the crowd with her phone raised, recording everything. "You're insane," Robert hissed, but his eyes betrayed panic. "She's having some kind of breakdown." "I have hospital records," Jessica said, pulling a folder from her clutch. "Documented injuries. I have bank statements showing forged signatures. I have text messages from Eleanor instructing Robert how to hide assets. And now I have 200 witnesses who've heard the truth." The district attorney stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The mayor's wife stared with her hand over her mouth. The ballroom had transformed from celebration to crime scene. Eleanor's composure cracked. "You ungrateful little—" She raised her hand, an instinct honed over years of violence, but this time Jessica caught her wrist. "Not anymore," Jessica said quietly. "Never again." The police arrived 12 minutes later. Maria had called them before entering the party. As officers approached Robert and Eleanor, Jessica felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Power. Not the power that came from money or status, but the power of truth spoken in a room full of people who could no longer pretend they didn't know. The Ashford facade, carefully constructed over decades, shattered in less than 10 minutes. And Jessica, for the first time since her wedding day, felt like herself. The following 72 hours unfolded with the chaotic intensity of a dam breaking. By Tuesday morning, Maria's article had gone viral. Highland Park's hidden horror: domestic violence in Dallas's wealthiest family, complete with audio from the anniversary party and copies of the forged documents. The story dominated local news cycles, then national ones. Cable networks discussed how affluent communities enabled abuse by prioritizing reputation over justice. Jessica had spent Monday night at Maria's apartment, her phone exploding with messages. Some were supportive, former friends who'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to help. Others were vicious, calling her an attention seeker, a liar trying to steal Ashford money. The dichotomy didn't surprise her. In communities like Highland Park, challenging powerful families meant becoming a target yourself. Robert and Eleanor were released on bail Tuesday afternoon. Their attorney, one of Dallas's most expensive criminal lawyers, already crafting a defense strategy. They claimed Jessica was mentally unstable, that her allegations were fabrications designed to secure a larger divorce settlement. The attorney pointed to the couple's wealth, suggesting that Robert would never need to steal from his own wife. It was a narrative designed to exploit every stereotype about domestic violence victims, particularly those married to successful men. But Jessica's attorney, Patricia Chen, was prepared. A former prosecutor specializing in financial crimes and domestic abuse, Patricia had built her career defending women navigating divorces from wealthy, controlling spouses. She filed an emergency motion to freeze all Ashford accounts and obtained a restraining order preventing Robert or Eleanor from contacting Jessica directly or through intermediaries. Wednesday morning brought Jessica's first real test. She sat in Patricia's downtown office, reviewing depositions, when her phone rang. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered, "You've destroyed everything." Robert's voice was barely controlled rage. "My business relationships, my mother's reputation, our family name. For what? Attention? Money? You violated the restraining order by calling me," Jessica said, her voice remarkably calm. Patricia was already dialing the police. "And I destroyed nothing. I revealed what you built, a facade covering abuse and fraud. You think anyone will believe you long term? My lawyers will bury you in paperwork. You'll spend years in litigation, every penny you have gone to legal fees." This was Robert's signature strategy, using wealth as a weapon, ensuring victims couldn't afford adequate representation. But Jessica had learned something in the past 72 hours. She wasn't alone. Patricia worked partially pro bono for domestic violence survivors. Maria's article had prompted other women to come forward, 3 former Ashford employees, claiming they'd experienced Eleanor's physical abuse, 2 ex-girlfriends of Robert's with similar stories of violence and control. The pattern was undeniable. "I'm hanging up now," Jessica said. "Your call is being traced. The police will have another violation to add to your charges." She disconnected as Robert was mid-sentence. It felt powerful, that small act of control. For 3 years he dictated every conversation, every decision, every moment of her life. Hanging up on him was more than practical. It was symbolic. That afternoon, the forensic accountant Patricia hired delivered preliminary findings. Robert hadn't just stolen Jessica's inheritance. He'd used her identity to take out fraudulent loans totaling over $1 million against properties he claimed she owned. The money had been funneled through shell corporations to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It was systematic, sophisticated fraud that demonstrated clear intent. Eleanor's involvement was equally documented. Text messages recovered from Robert's cloud backup showed her instructing him to handle Jessica after arguments, to keep her in line, to remember she came from nothing and should be grateful. In one chilling exchange, Eleanor wrote, "If she keeps challenging you, remind her what happens when she forgets her place. I'll come over if you need backup." The district attorney's office scheduled a meeting for Thursday. They wanted Jessica's full testimony for potential criminal charges: domestic violence, assault, fraud, forgery, identity theft. The list grew longer as investigators dug deeper. Wednesday evening, Jessica returned to Maria's apartment exhausted. The journalist had transformed her living room into a command center, laptop open, files scattered across every surface, phone ringing constantly with follow-up interview requests. 3 more women contacted me today," Maria said, pouring Jessica a glass of wine. "Former Ashford family friends. They said Eleanor's violence was an open secret in their social circle. No one intervened because, quote, that's how Eleanor is." Jessica sat on the couch, the weight of decades of enabled abuse settling over her. How many people knew and said nothing, in communities built on status and appearance? too many. Maria sat beside her. But you changed that. You made it impossible for them to keep pretending. I'm terrified, Jessica admitted, of the trial, of running out of money, of them finding some way to make this disappear. They won't. The evidence is overwhelming, and you're not fighting alone anymore. That night, Jessica dreamed of the estate's marble staircase, but in the dream she walked up instead of down. Each step took her higher, away from the ballroom, away from Robert's voice, away from Eleanor's cruel eyes. At the top, there was a door she'd never seen before. She opened it and found sunlight. When she woke Thursday morning, the dream's message was clear. This wasn't just about legal justice or financial restitution. This was about reclaiming the life that had been systematically stolen from her, one controlling decision at a time. The road ahead would be brutal. Trials, depositions, public scrutiny. But for the first time in 3 years, the path was hers to walk. 6 months later, Jessica stood in her new apartment in downtown Dallas, boxing up the last remnants of her old life. The space was modest compared to the Highland Park estate. 1-bedroom, 9th floor with a view of the city skyline rather than manicured lawns. But it was entirely hers. No surveillance, no permission required to leave, no hidden violence behind closed doors. The criminal trial had concluded in March. Robert pled no contest to assault, domestic violence, fraud, and identity theft charges. His sentence, 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. Eleanor faced similar charges and received 18 months given her age and lesser role in the financial crimes, though prosecutors emphasized her active participation in physical abuse. Both were ordered to pay restitution totaling over $1.3 million, Jessica's stolen inheritance, the fraudulent loans, and compensation for documented medical expenses. The civil divorce proceedings had been equally brutal. Robert's attorneys attempted every strategy Patricia had predicted, painting Jessica as mentally unstable, claiming she'd provoked the violence, suggesting the abuse was exaggerated. But the evidence was insurmountable. Hospital records from 3 separate emergency room visits, text messages and emails documenting Eleanor's coordination, testimony from the anniversary party guests who'd witnessed Jessica's revelation and Robert's violent reaction. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Sarah Hartwell, had seen too many cases of affluent domestic violence hidden behind expensive lawyers and community status. Her ruling was unequivocal. Jessica received her inheritance back with interest, half of the marital assets despite Texas's community property laws, a rare decision based on Robert's documented financial abuse and full coverage of her legal fees. More significantly, Judge Hartwell issued a statement from the bench that made headlines. Wealth does not purchase immunity from accountability. This case demonstrates how communities of affluence can enable and protect abusers by prioritizing appearance over justice. That ends here. The words resonated beyond Dallas. Jessica had received over 3,000 messages from domestic violence survivors, many from wealthy backgrounds, sharing their own stories of hidden abuse. Several had used her case as a catalyst to leave their own situations, contacting attorneys and shelters with new courage. Maria's reporting had won a regional journalism award and sparked policy discussions. Highland Park City Council introduced new training requirements for law enforcement on recognizing domestic violence in affluent communities. 3 local charities revised their eligibility requirements to help abuse survivors regardless of their spouse's income level. But the personal aftermath was more complex. Jessica's interior design career had imploded. Most of her clients were Highland Park Society wives who viewed her revelation as betrayal of their shared code of silence. She'd lost friends who chose loyalty to the Ashford family over supporting a domestic violence survivor. Social media remained vicious, with anonymous accounts calling her a gold digger, a liar, an attention seeker. Yet there were unexpected victories. A Dallas-based architectural firm hired her to lead their residential design division after reading about her case. The CEO, a woman who'd left an abusive marriage decades earlier, told Jessica during the interview, "We need people who understand that homes should be sanctuaries, not prisons." Jessica had reconnected with family members the Ashfords had systematically isolated her from. Cousins, aunts, her uncle who'd stood beside her at the anniversary party. She'd started therapy with a specialist in trauma and recovery, learning to recognize the subtle signs of control she'd normalized during her marriage. On this May afternoon, as spring transformed Dallas into a landscape of blooming magnolias and warm evenings, Jessica's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Patricia Chen holding a bottle of champagne and a folder of documents. "It's officially done," Patricia said, stepping inside. "The divorce is final. The restitution payments have cleared. And Robert signed away any future claims to contact you or contest the settlement." Jessica took the folder with shaking hands. The finality of it, the legal severing of 3 years that had nearly destroyed her, felt surreal. He actually signed? His attorney made it clear that fighting further would only extend his prison sentence and generate more negative publicity. The Ashford family wants this buried. Patricia opened the champagne. "Of course you made that impossible. Your story will be studied in law schools for decades. How to prosecute domestic violence and financial abuse in wealthy families." They toasted in Jessica's small living room, the city lights beginning to sparkle as evening approached. Patricia left an hour later, and Jessica found herself alone with her freedom, a concept that still felt fragile, new, like something she needed to learn how to hold without breaking. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "Dinner tomorrow? There's someone I want you to meet. Runs a non-profit helping domestic violence survivors restart careers. Thought you might want to connect." Jessica typed back, "Yes, thank you." She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Somewhere across the city, Robert sat in a prison cell, and Eleanor in another. The Highland Park estate had been sold to settle debts. The Ashford name, once synonymous with Dallas prestige, was now permanently associated with abuse and fraud. Jessica felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only relief that they could no longer hurt her or anyone else. The violence had left scars, both visible and hidden. The financial abuse had stolen years of security. The psychological control had altered how she moved through the world, making trust and vulnerability feel dangerous. But she was healing, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and difficult days. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was speaking truth despite terror. It was walking into that anniversary party knowing her life would detonate, choosing honesty over safety. As night settled over Dallas, Jessica made herself dinner in her small kitchen, played music Robert had forbidden, and planned her weekend without asking permission. These small acts of autonomy, once taken for granted, now felt revolutionary. The truth had arrived on cue that October night, exactly when it needed to, and Jessica, who'd spent 3 years silenced, had finally learned the power of her own voice. The aftermath was still unfolding, legal battles concluded, but emotional ones continuing. Yet for the first time since saying "I do" to Robert Ashford III, Jessica Monroe was free to say "I will" to her own life instead. And that, she thought as she looked out at the city she was reclaiming as her own, was worth everything that came next.